Hi there, John Wilkinson again, and History Made Easier again. In this presentation, I hope to show just how critically important the war at sea was in any explanation of why World War I ended the way it did. The Battle of Jutland was the only major confrontation between the two navies, and it is interesting as it showed the hesitancy of both navies to get engaged in a major sea battle. The consequences of defeat were simply too high. But it didn't affect the outcome of the war, so I'll not dwell on it here. It's the two blockades that I want to focus on. The German blockade of Britain was conducted by submarines, U-boats. Germany only has a small coastline. This meant that the few German ports could be more easily mined, and it was risky for the German fleet to leave its home port. So Germany resorted to unrestricted submarine warfare to try and impose its own blockade. Sinking ships, including neutral ships, approaching Britain without warning. But out in the Atlantic, it had to find the British-bound ships, and if the submarines hunted nearer British coastal waters, they ran the risk of attack, as the submarines of World War I had to surface in order to fire their torpedoes. But Germany had an even bigger problem in trying to impose its own blockade. For German submarines could only stop ships by sinking them, and what is more, were unable to pick up survivors as there was no room for them on the submarines. This understandably provoked widespread hostility from neutral powers, especially America, and it was one of the reasons why the Americans eventually joined the war. Britain, though, was in serious trouble. By the end of the war, more than 2,000 British naval and merchant ships had been sunk, and more than 12,000 sailors and merchant seamen killed. But Britain responded by organising convoys, grouping ships together, protected by a ring of warships. A convoy of ships, sometimes with a troop ship included, would be shielded by a cruiser, destroyers, and a couple of torpedo boats. The torpedo boats would have an aerial balloon with observers who would look for submarines as well as the tracks of torpedoes. And if a ship was attacked and sunk, the convoy would at least be on hand to assist survivors. What is more, once a submarine attacked, it would announce its presence and face attack itself. By early 1918, the British were building ships at a faster rate than they were losing them, and the convoy system, introduced at the end of May 1917, was an undoubted success. By the end of the war, of almost 9,000 ships that sailed in convoys, only 27 were sunk. So though the German U-boat may have caused considerable hardship for the British, it ultimately failed in its purpose, and instead, as we've noticed, unrestricted submarine warfare helped bring America into the war. Britain, as an island, didn't have Germany's problem. Having laid mines outside of Germany's naval bases and ports, it was able to impose a blockade by stopping German-bound ships at a safe distance from German shores. A distant blockade. You'll see the zigzag line stretching from the tip of Scotland to the Norwegian coast. And if ships evaded that, a closer blockade in the North Sea, the straight line on the map, was imposed. The same was more easily done to the south, with a blockade stretching from the English coast to northern France. What is more, the British blockade did not have to sink ships. They would instead be searched and, if necessary, turned back, or else escorted into British ports. This would still annoy neutral countries trying to trade, but there was no loss of life. The Germans called the British blockade the Hunger Blockade. Bread was rationed as early as January 1915, and in 1916, potatoes, butter, sugar, meat, eggs and milk were all rationed. And it should be noted that though these goods might be rationed, they still might not be available, nor affordable. To control supplies, the government also imposed restrictions so that no fats could be sold on a Monday, no meat on Tuesdays and Fridays, and no flour at weekends. To save grain used as fodder to feed animals, the government also ordered the slaughter of 1 million pigs in 1915, about a third of their total number. However, in the long term, as well as meaning there was less meat to eat, it led to less vegetables being produced, as it destroyed a valuable source of manure. The winter of 1916-17 in Germany was known as the Turnip Winter. As with the failure of the potato crop, it became just about the only thing available. Turnips had been grown for feeding livestock in winter. Now, they were just about the only thing left to feed the people. And at this point, both cats and dogs were being eaten too. The government ordered food kitchens to be opened in the larger towns and cities, and by early 1917, almost 500 towns and cities had a total of more than 2,200 such kitchens. In total, German deaths attributable to the blockade, something very hard to establish with certainty, is thought to have been at least 450,000. Hardly surprising when by 1917 most Germans were eating around 1,000 calories a day, when the recommended intake today is 2,000 calories for women and 2,500 for men. Germans died of malnutrition, and it is always the young and the elderly who are affected first. Deaths caused by tuberculosis rose 90% over the length of the war in towns. Typhoid deaths doubled between 1916 and 1917. Dysentery was another problem, and a growing number of children had rickets, a softening and weakening of the bones caused by a lack of vitamin D. Scurvy, a condition caused by a severe lack of vitamin C, and that can result in a number of symptoms from bleeding gums to tiredness, was also a growing problem. No wonder Germans referred to the British blockade as the Hunger Blockade. As a result, as this slide shows, there was serious unrest in Germany throughout the war, culminating in what came to be known as the German Revolution. It began in 1918 with mutinies in the armed services as Germany sued for peace. And it continued in the immediate aftermath of the war, with communists trying to overthrow the government that replaced the Kaiser, and Germans killing Germans in Berlin, Munich, and other German cities. So I hope that presentation proves valuable to you. As always, I remind you to check out my History Made Easier website. There are pieces on there that I think will also be useful for you. And as always, I do thank you for listening. Cheers.